if our moderator, WPTV's Michael Williams, is ready, we're going to ask the three panelists, Palm Beach County Superintendent Dr. Donald Fennoy, Palm Beach County Sheriff Rick Bradshaw, and Palm Beach School District Police Chief Lawrence Leon to come forward and take their seats. Thanks for coming. Feels great. Thanks for coming. Thank you. Thanks again.
First of all, thank you, gentlemen, for being with us. Three public servants for whom this topic is top priority. I talked to a number of people coming in today. One who said, we live in such sad times. Another who talked to me about the things that all of us need to do. It's not what they can do, it's what all of the community needs to be doing, and we'll be talking about that. As I thought about the topic preparation today, you can break it down into many categories. I think there's the physical infrastructure of schools and the physical hardening of schools, how we deal with that. There's the information and intelligence, delving into law enforcement, what we can do more there to prevent future tragedies. There's the mental health component, which in the Parkland case certainly is part of the information and the critique about information that perhaps was overlooked, helping lead to that tragedy. And then the broader societal concerns that all of us are wrestling with, talking about, and discussing. So we'll pick up our conversation first, though, as I always do, with a brief overview comment and no particular order. We'll simply begin from left to right with your brief opening thoughts, Palm Beach County Sheriff Rick Bradshaw.
Well, right off the beginning, I think we're very, very good at response. We have the equipment, we have the response, we have the policies in place, but I'd rather prevent something than respond to it. And I think that's where the information flow and the mental health component are extremely important here. And as we go on in the conversation, I'll be able to tell you that, it's worked here. We've seen it. We saw it the day after what happened in Parkland. So I'm a big proponent of prevention and making sure that the information that is actionable gets to the people that need to take action about it.
You'll talk about a groundbreaking app that you and I have discussed on my public affairs broadcast that will be part of that informational component. We'll dive into that a little bit more deeply. Chief Leon.
So with our agency, we've been really proactive for a long time in dealing with building relationships with the students and staff, being a component of target hardening our facilities. We've been doing it even before this incident. Our training is, we include active shooter training way before this incident. So our guys are constantly doing it. It's working together with our partners or the sheriff's office or municipalities and making sure our community, as they become their community, are safe. So we have to have that interaction and agreements and talking. We utilize the sheriff's, on the mental health side, behavioral health unit. And so we're integral in making sure our kids are getting the evaluations on our side as well as the sheriff's side, and we're making sure they're getting the appropriate services as well. So it's all prevention and making sure nothing happens again.
For those who may be unfamiliar, you're about 100 force strong?
We're 152. So we're in the high schools, middle schools, alternative schools, and we service a group of elementary schools.
Armed?
Armed. We're full certified law enforcement officers, recognized by the state, accredited by the state. We're one of the first school district police departments that were ever accredited in 2003, and we're actually up for our 5th accreditation in a couple weeks. So there was a posting, so if anyone makes any comments, you can.
Dr. Fennoy, your opening thoughts.
Yeah, so my opening thoughts are very intense and personal. So February 14th, 2018, as I'm driving to work after I dropped my own children off at school here in Palm Beach County. So to hear that something of this nature was happening just a few miles from our most southern schools here in Palm Beach County. So my immediate reaction was, are my children safe? And I had to take a moment, literally in my truck as I was racing down to the Boca communities to help what was going on, to wonder, what would it feel like if I went home today and I didn't know where my children were? And so At that time, I was the chief operating officer, and school police happens to be one of the functions that was under my purview at that time. So after I had my moment of tears in the car alone, I said to because this level of empathy went out for the 17 families and the hundreds of families that were connected. Really quickly, I learned that the Boca community was intimately connected. We had principals that work here in Palm Beach County whose children were in Parkland at the time of the incident. So this became very personal for me. And I realized at that moment that every decision that we make moving forward has to be in the best interest of not just Donald's children, every single child. Because now, today, as the superintendent, I'm responsible for all 197,000 children. And so I am very blessed and fortunate to know that since the early 80s, 1981, our school board has had their own police department. And we are definitely in a place, thanks to everyone in this room and the entire community, for putting forward a referendum that allows us to make sure that close to $40 million in security upgrades and target hardening will be happening quickly. And then also, thanks to the governor, we'll be able to expand our police force by an additional 75 officers over the next year. Again, I just want this community to understand, as a parent of a 2-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old son that go to school in Palm Beach County schools, that this is a very personal matter for me.
As we said, we'll talk topic by topic. All of you are aware of the much ballyhooed recent passage quickly by the Florida legislature, only weeks after Parkland, of the school and gun safety measure that includes money, including about $99 million at the outset for school hardening. One critique I heard going in is we have many older schools that were built with more of an open campus environment. So first, hardening of schools includes everything from armed law enforcement on scene, the debate about arming teachers. I want to talk and get your views on that. But to the physical hardening of schools, how hard is that to do, given that some of the schools were built with a different kind of campus architecture in mind? What kind of work is being done there, first and foremost? Let's begin first, you, Chief, then you, Mr. Fennoy, Dr. Fennoy, and then Sheriff, I'd like you to weigh in with the broader perspective. Chief?
So we have done assessments on all our campuses, and we look forward to moving forward with target hardening, and that's the single point entries. We've been doing this for a while. Just recently, we've had monies beforehand, and actually occurred, after the Sandy Hook incident. We were moving forward with projects with that. When it comes to an older campus, some instances when you start doing things, that campus is, say, built in the 80s, and when you open up an envelope, you have to build it up to building code of the current time. So it changes the whole focus, and sometimes it takes a little delay because you got to figure out what you need to do to make the current code. But we have evaluated all our schools. We have a plan in place. We're aggressively pursuing those single point entries, adding what we need. We're looking at the older schools, figuring out what we can do with
How many are
architecture.
single point entry now versus not?
I'm not going to give you a number because it's protected. There's a fair amount.
An overall number.
There's a
Percentage.
multitude of schools. I mean, we have 187 schools, but we have to be very careful because
Sure.
we try to.
You don't want to give out intelligence to a lot
Exactly.
of people.
The newer schools are built that way.
Yep.
And I had a part of that when I was here before I left in 2005 as the person who looked at architecture design and making sure we had single point entries. So all the newer schools had that component put in place. And so a lot of the older schools, we have gone back and we're even continuing to move forward. The referendum money makes a huge impact to assist us. And I would tell you, even if here's a piece, but the millage rate that is set by the state, if we were able to move that up, that would assist us greatly as well to make sure we have capital monies to assist us.
Do we need more? And some school districts have this, some do not. In Palm Beach County, for instance, in terms of locking down campuses, nobody can go in or off campus except for beginning of day, end of day. Where do we stand there right now?
That's a component that's in all the schools. The principals are told to keep their doors locked at all times. Once in session, that was a mandate by the board.
And no lunch break off campus. Everything remains to campus, or how does that work intraday?
We have probably maybe one school that has a special situation with lunches, but every school is a closed campus.
Do you see in the bill, Dr. Fennoy, enough money for physical hardening of schools, enough money for the kinds of things you need? What are the gaps in the newly passed school and gun safety measure that you see that you would like addressed?
Well, I think in our current form, if the money is reoccurring over time, I think we'll be in a good place. The reality is, will it happen beyond when the emotion of the situation dies down? As of today, we're going to be putting close to 200 projects on the street in the next couple of weeks.
And describe a few of those.
Oh, everything. There'll be a lot of security measures, single point of entry, roofs, fencing. I can go on and on.
Are we looking at metal detectors, bulletproof glass, steel doors, upgraded locks in your school systems?
Metal detectors will not be a part of that. We're still exploring that, but currently today, for the last 3 days, I've had 12 school police officers and experts from across the country doing a full assessment of all of Palm Beach County schools. They'll be reporting to me tomorrow for an official report in the next couple of months. But they're helping us, one, acknowledge the great work that our school police department and our board has done to make sure our campuses are safe. But also that nationally, we're part of a group called the Council of Great City Schools. Nationally, a lot of large urban districts are looking to us for guidance. Again, we're one of the few districts in the country that has our own accredited police department. With dogs, you name it, we have all of those things. And so now a lot of superintendents have called me recently to ask how that works and how we fund those things.
Sheriff, your purview, of course, countywide, schools inclusive. Your take on what you're hearing and your overview of the situation as we look at hardening of schools.
Well, let me give you the 50,000 foot view, because today we're talking about schools. We very well could have been talking about a government building. So we have to look at the overall active shooter situation. I look around the audience today, I see elected officials from government buildings, I see movie theaters, you just had it at YouTube, you had it at a nightclub. Everybody's got to look at their buildings. You know, after 9/11, we have them at the agency, we have people that can go to buildings and say to you, this is how you harden your building. Now, that kind of fell off after the 9/11 thing, because the danger that a lot of people were seeing is if I send these people to your building and we say, you need to do this, this, and this, and it's expensive and they don't do it, then they think they have some liability because now they're on notice saying, this is what you should have done for your building. So the schools are going to take care of what they need to take care of, but I would say to everybody in this room, business people, government agencies, private entities, you need to take a look at what's going on in your facility. Look what happened at a church. So take a look at your facility, find out if it's a soft target or it needs to be hardened and what you can do to make that happen.
To that point, and I know many of you grown and many students have said, we do not want our campuses turned into what feel to us like we're being imprisoned for our own safety in our schools. And you're hearing that across the state of Florida, across the country. But to your point about government buildings, though many of you rightly would groan, we have metal detectors at government buildings. Many are saying, if you have them there, why not at schools to protect our most precious asset? Despite what police have told you, is it the kind of tough debate that you're going to continue to have about things like that and more bulletproof glass? We're already hearing pushback. Students are told clear backpacks, and they said, these are the kind of things we don't like, but is it necessary? If we have them at the courthouse, why not schools?
Well, there's a practical piece to this. If I have a school like Boca High School with 3,300 kids.
Sure.
Literally, what time would school start?
Yeah, 5 a.m. to get them all through.
And so let's be really honest around some of those realities. Now, is there more we can do? Absolutely. But when you talk about what many of us after 9/11, just going to the airport, it took us a minute to get used to that. And some of us are still fussing and fighting every time we get there. So let's think about, some of those practical pieces. Now, there's potential for winding, but I think at the end of the day, our principals are doing a Herculean job of helping teachers and having eyes on the ground. Like one of the things that the board allowed me to do recently is to give all of our principals in schools that didn't have a single point of entry basically an extra person that they can use at their leisure to walk up and down hallways, to be that set of eyes. There's some opportunities we can do with camera systems. So there are some things that we're doing that are much more practical on the inside of the building than putting a metal detector and having 3,000 kids line up to walk into a building every morning.
How do you, to those in Palm Beach County, and again, it's a statewide national issue, but to the point of Palm Beach County schools, how do you assure and guarantee that the timeline of getting these fixes done doesn't get caught up in bureaucratic red tape, that the money's there? What kind of public transparency will you be providing to make sure that you're on schedule, on time, on budget with these kind of things?
Well, let me say this. So our board has a history of being on time. So that's first. I think, and as we got ready for this new referendum, we hired an agency called AECOM to help us manage some of these projects. We have an amazing new COO who was our former chief of facilities. Again, the fact that we have 200 projects going on the street this summer is fantastic. As the tax rolls come in, our CFO is doing an amazing job making sure the money's in the right line items. And then let's think about our business community. So I'll be honest with you, we are now in a process where we'll be bringing to the board some deregulation sort of processes. Basically, we've duplicated some processes that have made it difficult to get through the bureaucratic tape. But let's be clear, the board still needs to make sure that they have oversight and that everyone in this room who pays taxes, that we're being the best steward that we can, but also at the same time making sure that we're not driving up prices and getting in the way of timelines with unnecessary bureaucratic process.
Michael, you know, I know we're talking about hardening the targets, but part of that is what your security is, right? And I know we're going to get to this, but I might as well just jump into it right now. You got to have uniform law enforcement officers at the schools, not teachers with guns. It doesn't work like that, okay? Now, let me tell you.
He's been on to the point too much, because my next question was going to be that hardening of the schools, one of the major debates, has been exactly this. So since you read my mind, I'd like all three of you to weigh in on just that.
That goes right along with it. And let me give you the example. The guy that ended up at the Pulse nightclub, he was going to go to downtown Disney. They looked at it. You know why they didn't go to downtown Disney? There was a uniformed deputy sheriff there with a firearm, and they decided, you know what? We can't risk that. So they went somewhere else where there wasn't uniformed armed security. Why do you think we have people in uniforms with guns at airports? Is a deterrent. That's part of the hardening process. So my stance is uniformed, trained law enforcement into schools. I don't think teachers should carry guns, and I don't like this Marshall program where you have people carrying concealed weapons. That's not a deterrent.
That's not hardening schools, too.
That's not part of hardening any facility. Why do you think we have uniformed guards at the courthouse? It's the same thing. That's part of the prevention and deterrent.
I see you shaking your head very avidly in the affirmative, Chief. Go ahead.
I will tell you, I went to Tallahassee. I was up there a couple times. One was part of the work group with the governor's bill. There was three components. One was mental health, one was education, one was law enforcement. And we talked about that, where this program came from, and I said no. I also went in front of the Senate and the House and talked about, one, school district police departments, and educate them about school district police departments and how many they were in the state, and being part of that bill to ensure funding. The second part is I told them, don't arm teachers, because teachers need to teach, police officers need to be on the campuses, and would have the right appropriate person, a law enforcement agency on the campus to be there, to be that main physical security, be not only with the components of the hardening piece, but the first line of defense is a person and being on the campuses.
Dr. Fennoy, another piece, county by county, in Martin County, for instance, Martin County sheriffs provide that SRO function on campus. What more do you need to do to liaise with PBSO with its bigger budget, more personnel, and broader expertise? Some are arguing around the country it needs to be police officers from the city who are working that beat, or deputies. What are you all doing to liaise and bring in more of the expertise that a PBSO, for instance, can offer? What more needs to be done?
Well, I think there's a real reality. So currently, let me send out a public thank you to the sheriff and all of the municipalities that have been assisting us in providing that gap for us today. Across the country, you'll find hardly any school systems that put one officer in every elementary school. High schools and middle schools were always the main area. Again, we have the intense luxury, because we have such a great school board, that we have our own police department, so we've been able to manage that. I think moving forward, we will be working with some interlocal agreements and some MOUs to help fill the gap. But we'll also, our board and I have had conversations around how do we're mandated to get these 75 officers in all of our schools. So we've already allocated those funds. We're moving forward with those processes. We're looking to see if our compensation structure is competitive. We're looking at other incentives that we've discussed recently around attracting those individuals. But I think in the meantime, we absolutely need the sheriff and others to help us fill that gap.
You brought up a good point. I want to bring it up to the chief. I had somebody this week who knew I'd be moderating this panel and said, Mike, despite the new influx of state money to hire those people, it's hard to get competitive salaries to get the kind of people that you need for law enforcement at all the schools. You're shaking your head, Chief.
Yes.
How big a concern is that ongoing to compete salary-wise, despite extra state money, to get the number and quality of people that you need?
Well, that affects all of us, including the sheriff.
Sure.
Because when you look at some of the municipalities and the salaries they're offering and signing bonuses and other incentives, it makes it difficult for all of us. We have to look at how we're recruiting and moving forward, and where we're recruiting from. Is it comparative to Florida standards, and what we need to do to either compare to compliance. But when you look in the state of Florida, I believe out of 4,000 schools, only 1,500 schools are with law enforcement presence.
Right.
And so that means there's competition throughout the state. So it's going to be a huge monumental task to provide these services and get there.
But let me jump in here, because I have to say this on behalf of the school board. It's not about just filling a body. It has to be the right person to work with my son in my school. They have to want to work with kids. We are not in a position where I'm trying to put more kids in prison. We are not in a position where I want kids hurt. Our law enforcement officers build relationships with our children. There's a reason why Palm Beach County hasn't had a major incident like that. We get all kinds of intel from our school resource officers. And that is very important, and I don't want anyone in this room to misunderstand me. It has to be the right people who are committed to children who can work with our kids in schools.
Doctor, you provide an eloquent segue to the very next topic we're talking about the intelligence, the infrastructure. As all of you know, one of the great critiques after Parkland, both harsh and sad, was look at all the red flags that the suspected shooter had out there that were missed many, many steps of the way. Mental health evals, other incidents. The entire debate, all of you, I see some of you nodding, well familiar with those red flags. Sheriff, with that as a jumping off point, I know there's something you all are doing that you've been pushing for a few years now. It's come to the forefront more nationally now in terms of providing that extra tool. Talk about a new app you're doing and the overall broader view about intelligence, and then we'll move down the line.
Yeah, after the incident that happened down in Parkland, I started thinking immediately on, how we're going to make sure that the ball doesn't get dropped, because you had three different segments. You had the federal government, local, some school officials. I mean, it just wasn't coordinated. Almost 3 years ago, we had a company provide an app to the general public where they could get to us with our Homeland Security Bureau. As you know, we're in charge of Homeland Security for all of South Florida. We run the Fusion Center, and we wanted to get more information from the public, because the See Something, Say Something program is the most important thing we have going out here. Everybody out here sees something every single day that's important. So I asked the company, I said, look, I need something that's narrowly specific for the students in the schools, the kids, because what are they doing? They're on the phone all the time. I mean, some of them are at the dinner table across from each other texting, So
That is true.
I see laughter. Some of you say
So that was important. So they developed this app. It's called Student Protect. I wanted it to be free. It's free to anybody who wants to put it on their phones. Doesn't cost the school system a dime. I worked with your predecessor, Robert Avosa, and the chief here, and we rolled that out. And it's an app they put on their phones, they open it up, and it gives them a list of things they can report. Bullying, a fellow student that they think is having mental issues, maybe somebody they suspect might have a weapon, somebody that is acting in a manner maybe with a family atmosphere, abusing animals. There's a lot of things that they can report, but it's anonymous because they don't want to give their name sometimes.
And the question of that is the app adds to the amount of information we can have in modern society. One of the critiques, not of this app, but more broadly, certainly was actionable intelligence. So how do you take this good information? I put this to you and the chief. Again, that being the critique in Parkland, take that and the other tsunami of information you get in and make it actionable so you can stop the next person.
Well, the good thing about it is it's not going to the federal government. It's not going to another entity. It's going right to the schools. We're going to monitor it. But then there's a portion of the app that makes sure that the information was not only sent but received. So now the onus is back on the school or the jurisdiction that gets the information. It could be West Palm, it could be Boynton. They also get that information, and then they need to go do something about it. That's the second part of the puzzle.
Let's say that I'm the student, my classmate talked about bringing a weapon to school. In that scenario, what would happen? What will happen now?
Well, depending on the jurisdiction, if it's in the sheriff's jurisdiction, we'll work with the school police. We'll actually go to the house of the people that have reported that this weapon may be brought to school, or if there's some type of behavior that is unusual, and we'll do an interview and take action based on that. But that's where the mental health unit that I have comes into play. Because if we go to the residents and we interview the child, or it could be a 17-year-old, and the parents, and our behavioral sciences unit is there, and they believe that this person is a danger to themselves or the public, then we'll take them to mental health. That's how the system should work. The day after Parkland happened, we had information that a 17-year-old expelled from the school system had a gun. A neighbor saw it. He was yelling, "That guy stole my idea. I'm going to go back down and finish it." We got the information. We surveilled the house. We caught the kid and the mother coming home, got the firearm. It turned out to be an air pistol, but you can't tell anymore. The behavioral sciences unit went there, interviewed the child. We put him in 45th Street. He got some mental health counseling. That's how it works. That's how it should have worked down there, and you wouldn't have 17 people dead. It's not that hard.
So, Mike, yes, so the information goes to the sheriff. It comes to us, and we do the investigation. I will tell you, right after Parkland, we investigated over 120 social media threats to wherever it came from as far as we could. We would make contact, bring in either sheriffs or the municipalities in with the parent to have a discussion. If there was a threat, we would do the same thing. We would back the child or back into the administration for additional sanctions, administrative sanctions and services and those pieces as well. So it is a comprehensive, cohesive front, united front with all the municipalities and the sheriffs and us.
Working both ways, intelligence that you're sending to
Right,
the
things
sheriff's
we get,
office.
we go back, yes.
But you have to have the resources to take the action.
And do you feel under the new state law, and given existing resources and the add-on of what, depending on the numbers you talk about, it's $400 or $500 million bill, and Dr. Fennoy brings up, are we going to see that money continually renewed? Do you feel you have the resources at all levels to continue to do just what you said?
No, I need to expand the unit that I have. We handle about 3,700 to 3,800 mental health calls a year. That's 10 a day for us. So I've only got 5 of those teams. When I call it a team, it's a deputy that has a master's or a PhD in either psychology or social sciences, teamed with a mental health professional that we hire, and that's one team. I have 5 of those. I need 15 of those teams really to do what needs to be done. So right now, they're heavily overworked. We're monitoring about 200 people right now in the community that potentially could be a problem that are not, because we're monitoring them.
Given all that's been said and done, and this is a good jumping off point, for all the positives you've talked about, as you sit here today, what's your biggest critique you would offer to our audience about the holes that remain in the system in terms of whether it's intelligence gathering, actionable response? We're going to talk about some broader societal issues in a moment, but what's your biggest critique?
I think we're on the right path. My biggest fear is that this is like going to the dentist. You know, a week later, the pain wears off, and it's not a priority anymore. The pain cannot wear off of this. We can't just all of a sudden say, okay, we're going to get back to business as usual. If we get the funds, we get them. If we don't, no. We have to say, listen, do we have to pay a little bit more in taxes? Absolutely. Do we have to give up maybe a little bit of freedoms that we have? Absolutely. But what's the goal here? Keep our kids safe, keep us safe, keep our employees safe. There's always a give and take here. It's not going to be free, and it's not going to be to where everything is going to be done as usual, just like with the airports.
Dr. Fennoy,
I
weigh
think
in.
one of the most difficult, what we're not talking about, so I have the unique privilege. My father spent 22 years serving our country in the U.S. military. I was born on a military base. I always lived on a military base. My parents are from Detroit, Michigan. They grew up in neighborhoods outside of manufacturing plants. So here's a conversation that we're not having. The reality of our neighborhoods and communities, a lot of times we know who these kids are in our neighborhoods, but society has changed. We're not raising our kids as a collective group of people any longer. And it is difficult to tell your neighbor that I think there's something wrong with your son. Let's just be really honest around this. And I think that's something that I encourage all of you to go back home to your own communities and have a real conversation around how are we raising our children.
And maybe Nicholas Cruz doesn't get to Parkland that day
You
with
know,
that
so
very conversation.
Community policing, really getting down to the grassroots of who are we as a society. Like I remember as a child, when I stepped outside, my father, by the time I got to high school, he left in '88 to go to Desert Storm, but before then, he was a master sergeant, let's just say. Every master sergeant on that street knew that's Master Sergeant Fennoy's son. And if I were to do something crazy, there was going to be consequences at every door before we got there. And I'm not saying we go back to how many of us were raised, but at least a dialogue and an honesty around some of these things, that's our first level of prevention, ladies and gentlemen.
You think that's the void right now?
I do, I really do.
And another piece you have to look at is, and was brought up when we talked about mental health and Baker Acts and the ex parte orders and those pieces. You have those involuntary, voluntary Baker Acts. When those individuals get out of that services or center, there's no other services behind to provide either a mental health follow-up or social service. Those funds have gone away. There's very few of those. And that needs to be brought up again to continue those services. We have partnerships, and I know the sheriff has partnerships as well with others, but there's not enough. After a while, you need to have more included.
When the biggest mental health care facility in the county is the Palm Beach County Jail, there's a mismatch of community
And
priorities. You've talked about it frequently.
they don't belong in there.
Talking back to the school issues, the gun violence restraining orders, that's part of the debate that went on in the school and gun safety bill. Do you think those things in piece with what you've talked about will give you more tools? You're shaking your head, not sure.
Yeah, it is. That's a little piece of the puzzle, but I go back to prevention. You know, Dr. Fennoy brings up a great point. I mean, we could come up back here and have another hour meeting on just how we keep kids that are like Cruz being to that point, how we keep them out of gangs, how we keep the violence out of our neighborhoods. That goes back to what the doctor was saying. The family structure is not there anymore. Why do you think we have the kids in the gangs? They're in the gangs because they don't have a family structure, and the gangs become their family. So we could do another hour on that alone. But my biggest concern is I want to make sure that the money for prevention does not go by the wayside, right? It's like the fire department. They do fire prevention because they don't want to go to fires. I don't want to have to go and react with the SWAT teams and the helmets and the guns. I want to stop it before it happens. What do you think that is going on in the world today with terrorism? It's not all about responding to it. It's about catching the terrorists before they do something.
One topic we'd be remiss if we did not discuss. Parkland students have brought it up, been vociferous. Of course, all of you familiar with the recent march, and a big piece of the discussion they're having, part and parcel of this, is about assault weapons. Your thoughts, Dr. Fennoy, when you hear students saying, listen, I do not think we need to have assault weapons. It's a tough issue. I'm sure there's various views in this room on that. But your take when in Florida it was argued Nicholas Cruz would have had to be 21 to go legally buy a drink. But he could buy a rifle, an AR-15, at the age of 18. Again, a lot of checks missed that may have allowed that to happen. But I'd ask each of you for your thoughts about what is a raging debate and one that Parkland students say they will not let go.
I think for me, I mean, one, I can say this. I'm so proud of our kids right now. My grandfather, who just turned 80, I brought him down after the board voted me on. I took him deep sea fishing, and we were out there in the water. And he said, you know, Donald, I haven't seen kids this way since your dad was a teenager in the late 60s. And so I have to say that. I think just in terms of the gun issue, again, I'm a military brat, so guns are just part of my life. They always have been. However, but I always had an adult there teaching me, and it was part of the process and as we went on our annual shooting trips. And so I don't see anything wrong with making it more difficult. But, you know, again, as a person who grew up around those things, my own personal views as a family, it was always a family event for us. It wasn't, my father would never allow me to go buy a gun on my own. That just wasn't going to happen. And so I absolutely see nothing wrong with making it much more difficult for anyone under the age of 21 to get a gun.
And in Florida have done that with the new rules about having to be 21. As you know, Chief, any thoughts?
Well, for me, when I first started law enforcement, I had my dad buy my gun. So that's all that was, but which was interesting. I would have to say I'm going to have to leave it up to the legislation to make those decisions on how to properly manage this issue, because we're the only ones that will enforce things, but they're the ones that are going to have to take the action and make that determination.
And so give guidance, whatever it may be.
Right.
Sheriff?
I'm going to be a little stronger on this. I know that surprises you.
He can, I can't.
I'm going to take a holistic approach. It's not so much the instrument, it's what the person's hands you put the instrument in, which goes back to people that are mentally unbalanced and have shown the propensity for violence shouldn't be having any means to do what they have to do. I'll give you an example. After the Boston bombing, there was people that was saying, you know what, we shouldn't let underage people come in and buy pressure cookers, all right? So now because it's a gun, it's the same thing. What about with the cars? I mean, you know, what if Cruz would have taken a car and driven down the street when all the kids got out and run them all over with a car, which we've seen before. Yes. We wouldn't be talking about an assault rifle, okay? So it's not so much what the instrument is as it is whose hands is the instrument getting into.
But Sheriff, a lot of the kids would very respectfully say to somebody like you, they'd say, with all due respect, the easy availability of so many instruments to be able to get into so many hands precludes that argument.
Yeah, and that's why I think that, to their point, there needs to be some tightening up on it. I mean, there used to be an assault weapons ban for a lot of years. Nobody made a big deal over it. It was taken off, I think, by Bush 43, but it wasn't a big deal. When you stop to think about it, assault weapons have the word assault attached to them because that's what they're used for. They're used by the military. High capacity magazines, assault style weapons. You don't go deer hunting with them. Right. Guarantee you that.
No, you don't.
Okay? They're made for one thing. That's killing people. That's why the gangs like them. All right? So to tighten up on whose hands those are going into, and that's part of the background check, that's part of enhancing that background check, I'm all for that. But regardless of what the instrument is, we got to figure out who's walking in to these places to buy guns.
All of you have done this today, and we could take any part of this debate and go on for, as the sheriff said, aptly for hours and hours. But challenge people here as we begin to wrap and go to audience questions. Challenge them to think outside the box. As we often say, too often people say, that was great, hope they are able to solve this issue. What is the biggest challenge you would leave this audience with about the engagement and involvement, about what we're not thinking about, we need to look over the horizon for? We'll begin with you, Doctor.
I have to agree with something the sheriff said. I think at some point we have to talk about the financing of public education. And again, I think one of the things that's so fascinating, coming from the chief operating officer role to the superintendent, we run a business, a major business. We run the largest restaurant in Palm Beach County, the largest transportation department in Palm Beach County, the second largest police department in Palm Beach County, and I can go on, the biggest construction program in Palm Beach County, and all of that costs money and resources. And so I think at some point, again, I am so thankful that the taxpayers gave us that initial referendum, but there may be another ask in the near future specifically for security.
Bottom line, as we sit here today, after Parkland, for whatever flaws and omissions there may be in the bills and in the efforts, do you feel that we're on a path that schools will be demonstrably safer next school year than they were the day?
Oh, in Palm Beach County, the answer is yes.
No
oh, yeah, our people have already made sure that's happening.
Chief,
yes.
Your thoughts, your challenge to this audience?
I mean, our challenge is, we're doing what we need to do. We've always done it, making sure that our campuses are safe, our children are safe, building those relationships. It's moving forward with making sure we have the right amount of people in the right place and getting the opportunity to get those people and having the equipment needed and all those things that we need to perform the duties that we're required to do.
Sheriff, your final thoughts on any of the groundbreaking work you're doing and your final challenge about the community issues all of us are facing.
Yeah, I would say to the audience out there, quit being part of the silent majority. Stop. When I go to budget hearings every year, when they keep saying, well, the sheriff's budget's so big and all that, it is big because we're the 5th largest sheriff's office in the nation with the largest county east of the Mississippi doing 1.2 million calls for service a year. Yes, it costs a lot of money to do that. But you know what? I don't see a lot of people in the audience except for the same 3 to 5 people that go up there and say, you've got to stop right here, stop with the millage, roll it back, don't go any farther. Where's the rest of everybody that's sitting in this room that says, you know what, I'm willing to do another $5, $10, $15 a year if it's going to mean that I'm going to get better safety, better services?
And finally, just your last brief thought from each of you that you say to the students sitting out here who have said so plaintively, it breaks our hearts every time we hear it, I just want to go to school safely, to be with my friends. We've seen a lot of, I said kids, and I was wrong to say that. Unfortunately, a lot of kids had to grow up and become adults very, very quickly in Parkland and beyond. I know my daughters and I have discussed this. They're post-college now, but it's impacted them greatly. Your final thought that you say to the students here and elsewhere?
For me, and I've told everybody this, school is still one of the safest places to be.
It is.
And we have, a welcoming group between the teachers, the staff, the officers on the campuses who are there to support the students when they come to the campuses. And I will stick by that because it's true. The school is still the safest place to be.
And Sheriff, we'll close with Dr. Fennoy on this topic, our incoming superintendent, but your final message directly to the students here today.
Load the app. Be engaged. There's 10,000 downloads right now. That doesn't even scratch the surface.
And to those who say, well, I'm worried about ratting out my friend, what
It's
do you say?
anonymous. You can do it anonymous. And, how many times after every one of these incidences, whether it's this one or wherever we've seen, somebody comes up afterwards and says, I knew it was going to happen. Right. Well, if you knew it was going to happen, why didn't you say something? So I would say to the students out here, you know what's going on in your school, just like you know what's going on in your neighborhood. Tell somebody about it. I'd rather go to 10 calls where nothing happens and get the right one there.
Briefly.
Just to touch base, between the student app, student crime stoppers, the kids come forward to us and the officers and everybody else to give us tips. If it wasn't for all the students, we wouldn't be recovering all the weapons we have recovered on the campuses because they've built the relationship and trust with us. So right after Parkland, the next day we have 2 guns out of one of the schools because it was a tip given to us. So that's the importance of telling somebody of the incidents that are occurring, whether it's in your community or in our school.
Dr. Fennoy, final message.
Yeah, I would say as a person who's sort of between the baby boomers and the millennials, as a Generation X person, my charge to our beautiful children is this. Get your head out your phones. Start talking to people. Make eye contact. Interact with people. Develop the skill of communication. Develop the skill of giving and receiving feedback. If you see an officer, walk up to them and say hello. It's a beautiful thing just to be nice to people. I think a lot of this sometimes is we have kids that feel so isolated and are in so much turmoil and they have no one. Just because they may not be an athlete or a cheerleader in the band, man, just, especially the kids in this room, you're student leaders, right? Get out there and find a kid that is alone and say, hey man, come with us, hang out with us. And I think as we get, our pendulum has shifted way too far in another direction. Well, we don't even know how to talk to anyone, to each other anymore. So the sheriff made a great point. When you're sitting at the same table, texting across the table, that's crazy. Turn the phone off and say hello. And so that's what I want our kids to go back and start communicating the old school way.
You realize from the applause that I think about 500 people are inviting you to their home tonight to give that message to the youngsters. We'll go to the audience and student questions now.
Perfect. Keeping it real, Doc. I like it. If you have questions, please hand your cards to the volunteers. And gentlemen, we're going to hear from the students right now. If the first student from the Dreyfus School of the Arts will please stand up and introduce yourself and ask your question.
All right. Hello, my name is Madison Burmeister, and I'm from Dreyfus School of the Arts. Our question's for Chief Leon. So Chief Leon, a central concern of our teachers and students is that students at Dreyfus, especially those in the theater department, frequently stay after school. Unless they individually pay an officer to serve at a particular event, teachers and coaches are supervising kids alone every day. What safety precautions can be taken by our schools for after-school activities that occur on a daily basis?
Good question, Chief.
So, we have officers working in the afternoon. You can let us know that you're on the campuses so we can make a stop by, and we can let our other municipalities know that you're on the campus as well, and to ensure that you're safe. Have your events where you're secure in a secure environment. We're working to try to get additional coverages as an overlap coverage for later in the afternoon. So that's just something we're moving toward.
If the student from the Boynton Beach High School will please stand up, introduce yourself, and ask the question.
Greetings. My name is Ivan Franco. I represent Boynton Beach Community High School. This question is for Dr. Fennoy. As the school district superintendent, how will you work to empower students in Palm Beach County who want to engage in activism and fight for change while also maintaining their safety?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, I had the luxury of being a high school principal, so y'all get ready. And so part of that process is we're going to have to do this together. Like, there will be opportunities where I'll be inviting you and other students who are interested in this work to meet with me on a regular basis to talk about what responsible activism looks like. Because again, part of the safety isn't unique just to school police. All of us are a part of the process, students as well. So just look forward to when the invitation goes out, I hope you sign up to participate.
Excellent. And finally, the student from Suncoast High School.
Good afternoon. My name is Caitlin Adams, and I attend Suncoast High School. Sheriff Bradshaw, it is evident that there were a number of warning signs that were missed or ignored leading up to the Parkland shooting. What are some of the ways that we as students, teachers, and counselors can alleviate any concerns to prevent a similar tragedy from occurring in Palm Beach County schools?
That's a good question, and I think that with the development of this delivery system for the information that goes right to the school police and to us and to the local jurisdictions without having those other layers involved, and the fact that the delivery system makes sure that the information is received. And you've seen evidence of the fact, just of the incidents that have occurred since then, that the information will be acted upon and some type of action will be taken. So we've eliminated the layers, making sure the information gets to the people that needs to take action, and then provided the resources to make sure that action will be taken. So I feel confident that we're not going to let it slip through the cracks.
I'll follow up with that, and just so everybody here knows what it is, it's PBC Student Protect. PBC Student Protect, and it's on the Apple and the Google sites.
And our communications department has sent that out, and it's also on our website.
By the way, just for those who may be joining us from outside the county, or other counties rapidly adopting something similar?
The governor that was here when he rolled out the bill was talking to us about the app. He wanted to know how it was developed. He is going to take this app probably statewide. It may not be exactly with our vendor, it may be, but he was so impressed with the fact that it gets the information to where it needs to be in a timely fashion that they're going to adopt this and make sure every 67 counties school system will have the availability of the students having this app. And it's not, you know what, it's not just the fact that it produces something about a student. We had some information come to us yesterday where a student was at a school, saw a guy on a bicycle, an adult that would just there on that bicycle taking pictures of students coming to class, and he was there for no reason for almost an hour. So now we have a picture of that person. They reported it anonymous. We're going to go find out who that person is. Could it be a sexual predator? So it works in a multitude of fashions. So we may stop somebody from committing a crime, and it wasn't even a student.
Excellent. Gentlemen, we have a number of questions regarding the mental health aspect and prevention part of it. There's a lot of money that the state is giving us. What percentage is going to be dedicated to mental health? How much do you need to spend there? And is it difficult to allocate money towards that because it doesn't look like you're hardening the school?
Dr. Fennoy, we'll begin with you.
Well, I think initially the governor will be saving like $4.3 million. Our deputy superintendent, if you don't mind, please stand. His name is Mr. Keith Oswald. He and his team are currently working on some protocols and building some teams to address this specific action. And we'll also be going to the board to figure out what other mechanisms we can put in place moving forward. But just like with police officers and just like with teachers, our university system, we're not producing a lot of people in these areas. And so we are having to work very diligently with our local agencies to figure out what's our best approach. But right now we have some resources today. The hope is that those monies won't dry up in the near future.
Anybody else want to weigh in?
Yeah, that's not enough money. It's not even going to scratch the surface. right? I'm going to tell you right now, the state of Florida, unless the stats have changed, is 49 out of 50 states for funding mental health. That's ridiculous. For me to have to be the biggest mental health provider at the jail is crazy. 400 people a day I have to treat for some type of mental illness in there, and the mental health ward is full. They don't belong in there. They're committing minor crimes, but they have mental issues that need to be addressed on a professional level.
But as we all clap, many in Florida don't want to pay the taxes.
Well, there we go back to that again.
Support that. So that's part of the discussion. When it comes tax time, a lot of the, and I don't mean in this group, but a lot of the clapping turns into, whoop. So that's part of the larger debate.
Absolutely.
Chief?
I would say Florida shouldn't be in that level. I mean, even for education, we're, 42 in the nation? We should be a lot higher than that in providing services, and those monies equate over to everybody in the district on the operations side and the capital side. I mean, we need to step up and pay for the proper services and the needs. I mean, these are kids moving forward that need to have the proper education and not the challenges of making sure we have the funds to give them the proper education.
Okay. So we have some incredibly thoughtful questions here. Data shows that Black and brown children are disciplined more frequently and more severely than white children in this school district. What racial diversity education are both law entities requiring so that Black and brown children are not further traumatized by law enforcement on campus?
So I think it's an interesting question in that, those statistics are real, and I think part of the challenge, again, goes back to getting over our own biases and fears of individuals and starting to build relationships with people. I mean, our board has done some major work. Our former superintendent, we have a process called the Racial Equity Institute where people start to discuss. I think we have resegregated ourselves in many instances, but Palm Beach County has now taken major steps by putting us, I think we have to start communicating more. If I didn't have this suit on and I just had on my street clothes, I'd be a 6'4", bald-headed Black man walking down the street. Now, you can laugh all you want, but some of you would be absolutely terrified of me. And, but I have, between my wife and I, we have 5 degrees. And so part of it is this exposure that I'm receiving allows many of you to get to see me differently. And I think our children sometimes aren't afforded those luxuries yet. They're still kids. And I think a lot of us have to be really honest around that. I think that's part of the trauma, so to speak, is that many of us have had past experiences or have been told things or have read things and it's absolutely not the truth, And I think, so part of our struggle, and let's be real clear, a lot of those numbers are happening in communities or schools where the majority of the people suspending them are people that look like them. So let me be really clear, this isn't a white issue or a Black issue, this is all of our problems. And so we've got to figure that out by just taking the time to get to know folks, man. And I think that's the only way we're going to eliminate what's happening to a lot of our Black and brown boys.
Well, I think, arrest is never the answer to every situation. And in particularly this situation, arresting kids for minor things is not the answer. But having said that, we can't get information suppressed that shows trends. If you read the literature, if you have a kid in school that is bullying, he's disruptive in classes, he may be known to the fellow students of somebody that abuses animals. Now, in itself, all of these things are not something that the kid should be arrested for, but it's not information that should be suppressed for building a trend of somebody that has got issues that need to be dealt with. So there's a balance here. I don't think that all of the incidences that are in the schools that the child commits needs to be an arrest situation, but you can't turn your back on that information if your risk assessment teams are trying to put together a pattern on how the kid gets from here to where he's going to shoot somebody with a gun. The literature is very clear. When they start these patterns of bullying, disruptiveness, abusive with animals, abusive with people, there's a trend happening. That information needs to be transmitted.
And let me say this. I'm sorry to cut you off. And this is very important too. And even some of my board members who are staunch advocates for their communities will agree with me. If a kid shoots somebody the night before and the sheriff's department arrests them, they don't need to be in my school the next day, period. Yeah. And we've got to figure out a bit, now we own some of that, and we've got to figure out a better way to get that information flowing back and forth so that people who are kids who are, committing felonies of that nature, I don't want them next to my son, so why should they be next to anybody's child in school? And so I think that's another piece that we're going to have an honest family conversation about moving forward.
And where the resources are if they're a juvenile after law
Right.
enforcement
What do we
has
do
them
with them
after
after
they're
that?
not at school,
Absolutely.
so that the cycle doesn't continue.
So let me talk about, the school district has youth court.
Yes,
A
we are.
very successful program. We've actually made it more robust than it was when I first came in. We've revamped the whole system. We have partnerships. We have, the sheriff's has kids in there. Other I'm having a bad day with that word. Municipalities have their involvement as well. Just last year, we put up, did a whole piece with it. 800 and some odd students have gone through the program. Our recidivism rate was below 6%. So that means we look back at those kids after a year and there wasn't anything afterward. So we have different programs for the, and I have one even better. So we look at all that we do. We have the opportunity to turn kids over to the administration to handle those minor incidents, misdemeanors. We don't have to arrest. We have that discretion. And we do, because the administrative discipline, we can sometimes get better actions taken out of it. We have the youth court program, and sometimes it's a long time before you even have to get to the final piece, because a lot of time it's the victims, they want to press charges, whether it's a simple fight or not, and we try to avoid that. But when a victim says, I want to press charges, we have no other action, so we file to the state attorney's office, and when they have a component that actually comes back around and puts it through where children don't get a criminal history. Or even if we take that child to the juvenile assessment center, we have a piece in there that pulls that child back out and through other different programs. But our arrest rate has dropped tremendously. Doesn't say we don't arrest, but we do arrest. We do. We were in the 800s. As of January, I have like 164 arrests for this school year.
I'm just curious, we all use the word he almost reflexively. Is it preponderantly our sons and the teenagers, the boys who are in trouble, or are we seeing more of a trend line for the girls, the young women in our schools in terms of increasing issues?
It doesn't matter who you are. We get both.
Yeah.
Statistically.
Right.
But statistically, it's boys, but you're
Right.
seeing more African American and Latino girls being arrested at higher rates. I'll be remiss, I don't know their names, but I've been told in the 3 weeks I've been on the job, there are several judges that should be mentioned there to help us with the youth court. Would you mind saying their names?
So we have Judge Marks, Judge Kroll. Now I'm gonna forget the last one, I apologize, but we have 3 programs. A lot of times it's our state attorneys that help assist us, but 3 nights we're doing programs, mediations, arbitrations. So it's important to know that, that's a commitment in the arbitration mediation. The parents are involved as well. Yeah. So there's community service, and if it's like a misdemeanor drug case, they're even sent to do drug screenings, drug counseling, all those other components, and we come back to that.
I think we have another question teed up.
Sheriff, there's been a number of questions about the app. Specifically, is it available to private schools? And in addition to monitoring, do you keep reported information even if the issue is not criminal? Does it stay on the student's record?
Well, there's really not a student record that per se. Yes, the private schools have the availability of it. In fact, within the next week, we're actually going to host an event where all of the people that are involved with the private schools, we're going to put them in one room. We're going to explain to them how the app works, how the information is transmitted to us, and then how to have the local jurisdictions or the sheriff's office work to them to resolve it. So we're not keeping files per se on any students. This is information that comes in, transmitted to a law enforcement agency to take action on it. We don't keep files on anybody, whether it's kids or adults.
Our last question is talking about a program at Boca High. At lunch, they have a No One Eats Alone program. And do you think that this is a program that could spread throughout the district?
Well, I mean, absolutely. I think I've already spoken to that effect. I mean, again, I didn't know that existed, so we're gonna take a visit to Boca and check that out. But I think, I mean, again, that just speaks to the human side of all of this. You know, we're all in this together, y'all. We are in this together. And I would encourage all of you in this room who have children, nieces, grandchildren, just let's teach them how to just talk to each other and meet somebody different and new. And I think something that, like you're describing, is a good catalyst at the school level, but this has to extend beyond that. You know, take someone out to dinner that doesn't look like you sometime and just get to know them. I think those are the sort of things that we need to do more often.
Excellent. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your participation today. To all our members, we look forward to seeing everybody on April 30th for the Republican Gubernatorial Forum. Thank you for coming today.